Hey guys, tonight we begin with a question that might seem simple at first. What did it actually take to cross the North Atlantic in a wooden boat, guided only by the sun, stars, and centuries of accumulated knowledge, passed from father to son? Not the romanticized Hollywood version with perfectly groomed warriors shouting battle cries, but the real, bone-cold, wave-battered, sleep-deprived reality of spending days, sometimes weeks, on open water in a vessel barely longer than a modern school bus. We're going to experience what it meant to wake up soaked through, to eat food so hard it could break your teeth, to navigate by methods that seem almost magical, and to face weather that would terrify even modern sailors with all their technology and forecasting. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'm always curious whether you're settling in for the night or listening during the day. If you've got personal experience with the sea, whether Navy service or merchant marine, or if you remember stories your father or grandfather told about naval operations in the Atlantic during the war, I'd especially love to hear your stories down below. Your generation lived through history that younger folks only read about. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The North Atlantic, for most of human history, it was a barrier. A cold, angry, impossibly vast expanse of water that separated worlds. The Mediterranean cultures had their relatively calm inland sea. The Polynesians had their predictable trade winds and island chains to guide them. But the Norse? They had something else entirely. They had gray skies that might not clear for weeks. They had storms that appeared without warning. They had waves that could swallow entire ships. They had temperatures that could kill you through exposure, even in summer. And yet, somehow, they mastered it. We're going to spend the next couple of hours aboard one of these vessels, experiencing what a typical day, if such a thing existed, might have looked like for the men who dared to point their prows westward into the unknown. We'll feel the cold that never really leaves your bones. We'll taste the food that sustained them. We'll try to understand how they navigated without compasses, GPS, or even accurate maps. And we'll witness the sheer physical and mental endurance it required just to survive, let alone to raid, trade, and explore across thousands of miles of open ocean. This isn't a story about discovery dates or famous battles. This is about the ordinary extraordinary, the daily grind of men who treated the ocean like we treat highways, who knew every mood of the sea like we know our morning commute. Men who would have looked at our modern complaints about uncomfortable airplane seats and long security lines with a certain bemused disbelief. So settle in. We're going to see the way they did, slowly, thoroughly, with all the uncomfortable details intact. And if you find yourself drifting off during the extended sections about rope maintenance or the proper technique for bailing water, well, that's rather the point, isn't it? History doesn't have to be loud to be fascinating. Sometimes the quiet details are the ones that stick with you. Let's begin at the beginning, with the gray light of dawn, the constant motion of the ship, and the realization that you're waking up wet, cold, and still dozens of miles from anywhere that matters. Picture this. You're waking up not to an alarm clock not to gentle sunlight through curtains, but to the sensation of being cold and wet again. Still, the wool blanket you'd wrapped yourself in last night is soaked through from sea spray. Your furs smell like a combination of wet dog, salt, and that peculiar funk that develops when you haven't had a proper wash in weeks. Your muscles ache from yesterday's rowing. Your hands are raw, despite the calluses you've built up over years of this life. And the first thought you have before you even open your eyes is a simple one. At least we're still afloat. There are no cabins on a Viking longship, no below-decks bunks like on later sailing vessels. You sleep where you can find space, usually curled up against a sea chest, using a coil of rope as a pillow, hoping that the relatively small amount of water that's always sloshing around in the bottom of the ship doesn't find its way into your already miserable sleeping spot. If you're fortunate, you're near the mast where there's some psychological comfort of having something solid nearby. If you're less fortunate, you're up at the bow or stern where the motion is worst, where every wave feels like it might pitch you into the sea. The longship never stops moving. Even on calm days, and truly calm days in the North Atlantic are rare, there's that constant rise and fall, that gentle but persistent rocking that becomes so familiar you eventually stop noticing it, except when you first step back onto solid land and everything feels wrong for a few hours, while your body readjusts. But this morning, the motion is more pronounced. Not storm conditions, not yet, but the swells are building. You can feel it in the way the ship rises, pauses for a heartbeat at the crest, then slides down into the trough with a rush that makes your stomach lurch. Around you, other men are stirring. Nobody speaks much. What is there to say that hasn't been said 100 times before? Someone is bailing. There's always someone bailing. Because a ship this size, built from overlapping planks, sealed with tarred rope and animal hair, is never completely watertight. It doesn't leak badly, not if it's well maintained, but it's always taking on some water. That's just the reality of wooden ship construction. You accept it the way you accept rain or wind, or the fact that your feet haven't been completely dry in 3 days. Someone else is checking the lashings on the sea chests. In the night with the ship rolling, things can work loose. A loose chest sliding across the deck might not sound like much, but it can crack a man's leg, damage the hull planking, or go overboard taking valuable supplies with it. Everything has to be secured, checked, and resecured. It's tedious work, the kind of maintenance that never ends. But it's also the kind of thing that keeps you alive. Those of you who served in the Navy, particularly in the Korean War era, before the larger carriers and modern vessels, might remember something of this routine. That constant maintenance, that checking and rechecking, that awareness that the sea doesn't care about your comfort or convenience and will exploit any weakness. The scale is different. A 23-meter longship versus a destroyer or transport. But the principle is the same. The ocean is patient. It will find your mistakes. You finally sit up, pushing off the sodden wool blanket. The motion makes your head swim for a moment. Not seasickness. You're well past that after years at sea, but just the immediate disorientation of waking on a moving platform. You flex your fingers, trying to work some feeling back into them. They're not frostbitten, You've been careful about that, keeping them as dry as possible, moving them periodically through the night, but they're cold enough that they ache. The sky is gray. It's almost always gray out here, a uniform blanket of clouds that makes it impossible to judge the time with any precision. Could be an hour after dawn, could be 3. The sun is up there somewhere, but you can only tell by the slightly lighter patch in the eastern sky. Later, if you're lucky, that patch will grow and you might even see the sun directly. That's important, not for warmth, though you'd welcome that, but for navigation. Without the sun, your options for determining position and direction become significantly more limited. You stand carefully, holding onto the mast for support. Your legs remember this routine even if your mind is still foggy. You never stand up quickly on a moving ship unless you enjoy the experience of falling and looking foolish. Around the ship, the ocean stretches in every direction. No land, no other ships, just water, endless water, rising and falling in long swells that come from the northwest, which means the wind, when it picks up, will likely come from the same direction. That's useful information. File it away. The smell is distinctive. Salt, obviously, overwhelming and constant, but also tar from the hull, wool and leather from the gear, the faint sourness of unwashed men, and fish, both from last night's meal and from the ocean itself. It's not pleasant exactly, but it's familiar. Home. If you're a man who makes his living on the water, or at least as close to home as you get for the weeks or months this voyage will take, you make your way carefully toward the stern, where fresh water is stored in sealed wooden barrels. Your throat is dry, not from thirst so much as from breathing salt air all night, and you're allowed a small cup of water to start the day. Not much. Water is precious out here, more valuable than almost anything else on board. You might be surrounded by water, but none of it is drinkable. People have died of thirst in sight of land, their water supplies exhausted, unable to drink the seawater that would only kill them faster. So, you take your small cup, you drink it slowly, and you're grateful for it. Those who remember rationing during the war, whether World War II or Korea, might understand something of this mindset. That careful measuring, that awareness of exactly how much you have and how long it needs to last. But even wartime rationing, difficult as it was, came with the knowledge that eventually there would be more. Eventually, the supply convoy would arrive, or the war would end, or something would change. Out here, there's no such certainty. If your water runs out before you make landfall, well, that's it. You turn back if you can. You pray for rain if you're desperate, or you die. Those are your options. The ship's master, the steersman, the man with ultimate responsibility for this floating piece of Nordic engineering, is already at his position by the steering oar. He never seems to sleep, though of course he must. He's probably 40 winters old, which makes him ancient by Viking standards, and he has the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of exposure to sun, salt, and wind. He doesn't give orders yet. He's watching the sky, watching the water, feeling the ship's motion beneath him, reading signs that most people would never notice. This is his craft in every sense of the word. He built parts of this ship with his own hands. He knows every plank, every rib, every weak point and strong point. And right now, He's deciding what kind of day this is going to be. Breakfast. The word suggests something more appetizing than what's actually on offer. The reality is this: you're eating dried fish that's been dried so thoroughly it's more leather than food, supplemented by whatever provisions can survive weeks at sea without refrigeration, which turns out to be not very much. The ship's cook, a position of surprising importance given the limited menu, has started a small fire in the sandbox mounted midship. This is one of the most dangerous activities on a wooden boat, but it's necessary if you want hot food. The sandbox is essentially a large wooden box filled with wet sand, creating a fireproof platform where you can build a small fire without setting the ship ablaze. The fire itself is more coal than flame, just hot enough to heat water or cook the occasional fresh catch, if you're lucky enough to hook something, into a pot of seawater. Yes, seawater, because why waste precious fresh water on cooking when salted water works fine? The cook tosses chunks of dried cod from Norwegian waters caught months ago, split open, salted, and dried on wooden racks until it achieved the consistency of shoe leather. This is stockfish, and it was one of the great innovations of Norse seafaring. Fish preserved this way can last for months, even years, without spoiling. Of course, it also requires soaking and cooking for a considerable time before it becomes something you can actually chew without risking your teeth. You're handed your portion in a wooden bowl. The soup is gray, flecked with white bits of rehydrated fish. There's no seasoning beyond the salt that's already in the fish. And trust me, there's plenty of that. No pepper, no herbs, nothing to make this more palatable. Just fish, water, and the faint taste of smoke from the cook fire. Luxury. Thy name is definitely not Viking breakfast. But here's the thing. It's hot. And when you're cold and wet and facing another day of physical labor in harsh conditions, hot food is a gift from the gods themselves. You don't appreciate this when you're young and foolish. You complain about the taste, the texture, the monotony. But after your first winter voyage, after you've experienced what it's like to eat cold, dried fish for days on end because the weather was too rough to light a fire, you learn to be grateful for anything warm. You eat slowly, not because you're savoring it. Nobody savors this, but because you need to make it last. This is your major meal of the day. There might be some dried meat or hardtack later, but this is it for hot food. Your body is burning through calories at an incredible rate, rowing, hauling ropes, fighting the cold, simply staying upright on a constantly moving surface. And this gray fish soup is your fuel. Around you, men eat in relative silence. This isn't a social meal, like dinner might be on a good night when spirits are high and someone has a story to tell. This is functional eating, taking on fuel, preparing for work. A few men exchange quiet words, comments about the weather, speculation about how many more days until landfall, dark jokes about the quality of the food, but mostly, there's just the sound of the ship, the creak of ropes, the slap of water against the hull, the occasional snap of the furled sail in the wind. Someone passes around a skin of sour ale. It's weak stuff, barely alcoholic, but it's safer than water that might have gone bad. And it provides a few extra calories. You take your small share, wash down the last of the fish, and hand the skin to the next man. Everything is measured, shared, rationed. 30 men on a small ship develop a sense of economy that makes Depression-era frugality look wasteful. Those who grew up in the 30s or 40s, who remember when nothing was wasted, when you ate what was put in front of you because that's what there was, might recognize this mindset. There's no throwing away leftovers here. If you don't finish your portion, someone else will. If the cook burns something, you eat it anyway. If the fish is a bit more rancid than usual, you hold your nose and get it down. Wasting food at sea isn't just rude or thoughtless, it's potentially fatal. Next week, that wasted handful of dried fish might be the difference between hunger and starvation. The meal doesn't take long. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Then the bowls are collected, rinsed with seawater, and stored away. The cook dampens the fire, careful to make absolutely certain that not a single ember remains active. A ship fire at sea is a death sentence. No exaggeration, no hyperbole. If the ship burns, you die. So the fire is managed with the kind of paranoid attention that seems excessive until you've seen what happens when it isn't. And with that, breakfast is over. Your stomach isn't exactly satisfied, but it's no longer actively complaining. That's about as good as it gets. Now comes the work, the endless, exhausting, absolutely necessary work of keeping a Viking longship moving across one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth. Those of you who've done hard physical labor for long stretches, whether military service, construction work, or farming, know the routine. You don't wait until you feel ready. You don't wait until you feel strong or energized or properly rested. You just start working because the work needs to be done and nobody else is going to do it for you. The wind has died. Or more accurately, the wind is coming from exactly the direction you need to go, which amounts to the same thing when you're dependent on a square sail that can only really work with the wind coming from behind or the sides. So the sail remains furled, and that means you're rowing. All of you. Every able-bodied man who isn't actively steering or navigating takes a place at an oar. This isn't like rowing a small boat on a calm lake. These oars are massive, 12 to 15 feet long, hewn from single pieces of spruce or pine, heavy even before they hit the water. Each oar is worked by one man, pulling against the resistance of the ocean with nothing but muscle, bone, and stubborn determination. And you're not rowing for 10 minutes or half an hour. You're rowing for hours, sometimes 8, 10, 12 hours, with only brief breaks to rest aching backs and blistered hands. You take your position on the port side, 4 places back from the bow. The bench is a simple wooden plank. No padding, no back support. You said you brace your feet against the support strut running along the bottom of the ship, and you wrap your hands around the oar handle. Your hands are already sore from yesterday. They'll be worse tomorrow, but that's future you's problem. Present you has to pull this oar. The steersman gives the call. Not a dramatic shout like in the movies. Just a calm, measured, ready pull. And you pull. You lean back, engaging your legs and core more than your arms, though your arms are doing plenty, and you drag that oar blade through the water. The resistance is immediate and substantial. Water doesn't want to move. Physics doesn't care that you're tired or cold, or would rather be literally anywhere else. You pull anyway. The rhythm is everything. If everyone pulls together, the ship moves efficiently. If the timing is off, if someone catches a crab or misses the stroke, the whole system becomes chaotic and exhausting. So, you watch the man in front of you, match his timing, and become part of the machine. Pull, recover, slide forward, set the blade, pull again, pull, recover, slide forward, set the blade, pull again. Your body finds the rhythm. Your mind starts to drift. This is where the hours go. Time becomes strange when you're rowing. The first 30 minutes feel like an eternity as your muscles warm up and your body protests this renewed assault. The next hour passes in a kind of meditative blur. After 2 hours, you stop thinking about time altogether. You're just rowing. The ship creaks. The water rushes past. Your breath comes in steady, measured pulls that match the oar strokes. This is your world now, reduced to a simple, repetitive motion that you'll perform thousands of times before anyone relieves you. Veterans who served, particularly those who spent time in infantry or on working ships, might recognize something of this experience. That point where physical exertion becomes almost automatic, where your body does the work while your mind wanders. It's not pleasant exactly, but it's not entirely unpleasant either. There's something almost peaceful about labor so repetitive that you don't have to think about it. Your thoughts drift. You remember home, a real home with walls and a fire and people you love. You think about what you'll do when you make landfall. You compose elaborate fantasies about hot baths and fresh bread and sleeping in a bed that doesn't move. Or you think about nothing at all, just exist in the moment, pulling an oar across an ocean that doesn't care whether you succeed or fail. The ship begins to move with more purpose. 30 men rowing in unison can move a long ship at a reasonable pace, not fast by modern standards, maybe 4 or 5 knots, but steady progress against the swells. You can feel it in the ship's motion, that shift from wallowing in the troughs to cutting through the water with intent. This is what the ship was built for. This is what you were trained for. From the time you were old enough to hold a small oar in a coastal fishing boat. Halfway through the second hour, your lower back starts to burn. Not a sharp pain, just a deep, building ache that spreads across your lumbar muscles and radiates down into your hips. You shift your position slightly, trying to find some relief, but there really isn't any. This is the price of progress. You keep rowing. Your hands are sweating inside their leather wrappings, which creates its own problems, because now you have damp leather rubbing against skin that's already trying to blister. You'll deal with that later. Right now, you can't stop to adjust your grip without throwing off the timing. So you endure and you keep pulling, and you tell yourself that eventually there will be a break, even though you know that eventually might be 3 or 4 more hours away. The man in front of you, Bjorn, you think his name is, though you've barely exchanged 10 words with him this entire voyage, starts to slow. You can see it in his stroke, that slight hesitation at the catch, the reduced power in his pull. He's been rowing longer than you have, started before dawn when you were still trying to sleep. He's exhausted, but he keeps going because Stopping isn't an option. If he stops, someone has to take his place, and that someone is just as tired as he is. So he keeps rowing, and you keep rowing behind him, and all 30 of you keep pulling these massive oars through the cold North Atlantic water, because that's what you signed on for when you agreed to crew this voyage. This is the unglamorous reality of Viking seafaring. Not the dramatic battle scenes or the triumphant landfall, but hours upon hours upon hours of back-breaking labor, building calluses, developing injuries that will take months to heal properly, pushing your body to its limits and then pushing it further, because the alternative is drifting at sea until your provisions run out or a storm finishes you off. Those who remember when physical labor was just part of daily life, not something you paid for a gym membership to simulate, might understand this differently than younger generations. This wasn't exercise. This wasn't training. This was work, pure and simple, the kind that leaves you hollow and aching at the end of the day, with nothing to show for it except the knowledge that tomorrow you'll do it all again. The rowing continues, but now attention shifts to something that would seem almost magical if you didn't understand the principle behind it. The steersman has called for the navigator. Yes, there's a specialist for this, usually one of the older, more experienced sailors, and the navigator is now holding what looks like a simple, cloudy crystal up to the gray, sunless sky. This is a sunstone, or at least that's what the sagas call it. Modern scholars debate exactly what it was. Probably calcite or cordierite, crystals that have unusual optical properties. But whatever its exact mineralogical identity, it works. Somehow, impossibly, it allows a skilled navigator to determine the position of the sun, even when the sun is completely hidden by clouds or fog. The physics involved is something called double refraction, or birefringence. Certain crystals split incoming light into two rays polarized at right angles to each other. When you look through the crystal at the sky, you see two slightly offset images. By rotating the crystal and observing how these images change, you can determine the direction of polarized light in the sky. And even on a completely cloudy day, there's a pattern of polarized light created by the sun's position. It's always there, invisible to the naked eye, but detectable with the right tools and knowledge. Of course, the Vikings didn't understand the physics. They didn't need to. They understood that if you held the crystal just so, rotated it until the two images matched in brightness, the direction you were facing at that moment would tell you something specific about the sun's location. Whether they conceptualized it as polarization or magic, or simply the stone knows, doesn't matter. It worked. That's what matters at sea. The navigator mutters something to the steersman. A slight course correction is needed, maybe 5 degrees to the west. The steersman makes the adjustment at the steering oar, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, the ship's heading changes. No one else really notices. The rowers keep rowing. But now you're pointed more accurately toward your destination, whatever that destination might be. Iceland, maybe, Greenland, or perhaps the fabled lands even further west that some claim to have found. This is how the Vikings crossed oceans. Not with compasses. Those wouldn't arrive in Europe for centuries yet. Not with sextants or chronometers or GPS, with crystals, with accumulated knowledge passed from father to son, with an almost supernatural ability to read signs in nature that most people never even notice. But the sunstone is only one tool in a much larger toolkit. The navigator also watches the waves, their direction, their spacing, their character. Different parts of the ocean have different wave patterns influenced by underwater geography, prevailing winds, and deep currents. An experienced navigator can tell you approximately where you are based on nothing but the waves. It's not precise, not like modern navigation, but it's surprisingly accurate when you've spent 30 years watching water. He watches for birds. Certain species never venture more than a day's flight from land. If you see a puffin, you know land is relatively close. If you see only petrels and fulmars, open ocean birds, you're still in deep water. The direction birds fly at dawn and dusk can indicate where land lies. It's not certain. Birds can be misleading, but it's another data point, another piece of the puzzle. He watches the watercolor. Deep ocean is a different shade of blue-gray than shallow coastal water. He watches for floating seaweed, which can indicate currents or proximity to land. He even smells the air. Land has a distinct scent, a combination of earth and vegetation, and sometimes smoke from fires that carries over water. If the wind is right, you can smell Iceland before you see it, they say, if you know what you're smelling for. And at night, if the clouds ever break, he watches the stars. The Norse didn't have sophisticated star charts like Mediterranean cultures, but they knew the key stars. The North Star, obviously. Certain constellations that rise and set at predictable points on the horizon, depending on your latitude. The angle of the North Star above the horizon tells you how far north you are, though measuring that angle precisely without instruments requires yet another set of techniques involving wooden boards with notches and a lot of practiced estimation. Those of you who served in navigation roles during the war, before GPS and satellite systems, might appreciate something of this challenge. Dead reckoning, celestial navigation, using tools that required skill and interpretation, rather than digital readouts that gave you coordinates to 6 decimal places. There's a certain art to it. A craft that combines mathematics and intuition in ways that modern navigation has largely automated away. The difference is that you had actual instruments, sextants, chronometers, detailed charts. The Vikings had crystals, wooden boards, and centuries of accumulated lore. And yet, they crossed the Atlantic repeatedly, established trade routes and settlements, navigated to specific destinations, and found their way home again. Sometimes they got lost. The sagas are full of ships that disappeared or ended up wildly off course. But remarkably often, they got it right. Historians still debate exactly how they did it. The sunstone is documented in the sagas, but no confirmed archaeological example has ever been found. The other techniques, wave watching, bird following, star navigation, are all plausible, but how they combined them into a coherent navigation system remains partially mysterious. All we know for certain is that it worked. The evidence is undeniable. They went places and came back. That requires navigation, by whatever means, so you keep rowing, trusting that the navigator knows what he's doing, trusting that the steersman will keep you on course, trusting that eventually, days from now, weeks from now, a dark smudge will appear on the horizon and resolve into land. That's the deal. You provide the muscle. They provide the knowledge. Everyone does their job, and maybe, just maybe, you all survive to tell stories about it. After 3 hours of rowing, you get a break. Not because the work is done, it's never done, but because you need to be rotated to other tasks before your back gives out completely. Someone else takes your oar. You stand carefully, holding the mast until your legs remember how to function properly after sitting hunched on a wooden bench for so long. Everything aches. That's normal. Your new assignment, bailing. Always with the bailing. A long ship, as mentioned earlier, is never completely watertight. The clinker-built construction method, overlapping planks, creates a hull that's flexible and strong, but also prone to seepage. The gaps between planks are caulked with tarred animal hair or wool, and this works reasonably well. But reasonably well at sea still means you're taking on water constantly. Not a lot. Not enough to sink you, assuming nothing's actually broken, but enough that if you stopped bailing for, say, a full day, you'd be in serious trouble. So you bail. You take a wooden bucket, carved from a single piece of wood, no metal fittings to rust, and you scoop water from the bilge and dump it overboard. Scoop, lift, dump, repeat. It's mind-numbing work, which is almost a relief after the intense focus required for rowing. Your mind can wander while your body goes through the motions. Scoop. The water is cold against your hands. Lift. Your lower back complains. Dump. Watch the water arc over the side and return to the ocean it came from. Repeat. You'll do this for an hour, maybe more. Then someone else will take over, and you'll move to another task. Everything rotates. Everyone shares the burden. That's how you survive on a small ship with limited crew. But bailing isn't the only maintenance. There's always something. The rigging needs checking. Ropes can chafe through. Knots can work loose. Blocks can seize up. The sail needs examining for wear and small tears that should be patched before they become large tears. The hull needs visual inspection from inside, looking for any planks that might be working loose, or any seepage that's gotten worse. The oars themselves need attention. After hours of use, the leather wrappings on the handles come loose or wear through. These need to be rewrapped or replaced. The oar blades need checking for cracks or splits. A broken oar mid-stroke can injure the rower and leaves you one oar short, not catastrophic with 30 rowers, but you'd rather not be down any equipment if you can help it. The steering oar gets special attention. This is the single most critical piece of equipment on the ship after the hull itself. Lose the steering oar and you can't control direction. That's immediately life-threatening in any kind of rough weather. So the steersman or his assistant inspects it multiple times per day, checking the wooden shaft for cracks, the blade for damage, and the leather pivot strap that holds it to the ship's side for wear. All of this maintenance happens simultaneously with everything else. Some men row, some bail, some work on repairs. One man always watches the horizon for land, for other ships, for weather changes, for anything that might matter. Another tends the modest food supplies, checking for spoilage, rationing what's left, calculating how many more days you have before you absolutely must find land or turn back. Those who've served on working ships, whether military or commercial, know this routine. The ship never stops being a ship. It never gets a day off. Every day brings new wear, new small damages, new problems that need attention before they become big problems. In a way, the ship is like a living thing that requires constant care. Neglect it for even a day, and consequences follow. Neglect it for a week, and you might not survive. The work is distributed according to skill and experience. The youngest crew members do the simpler tasks: bailing, basic rope coiling, helping with food preparation. The middle-aged men do most of the rowing and heavier maintenance. The older men, those with decades of experience, handle the specialized work: navigation, steering, the more complex repairs that require expertise. Everyone has a role. Everyone contributes. And underlying everything is the knowledge, unspoken but ever present, that your survival depends on everyone doing their jobs competently. There's no calling for help out here. No Coast Guard, no rescue helicopters, no nearby ships monitoring distress channels. If something goes catastrophically wrong, you're on your own. 30 men against the ocean, with nothing but this wooden vessel and your collective skill standing between you and a cold death in water so frigid you'd lose consciousness in minutes. That knowledge focuses the mind wonderfully. You don't slack off. You don't half-ass your work. You don't take shortcuts, because the consequences of failure are absolute and immediate. Here's something the sagas don't really talk about, something that doesn't fit into dramatic retellings of Viking voyages: the sheer, crushing monotony of being at sea for extended periods. You wake up and see ocean. You work all day and see ocean. You go to sleep watching ocean, and tomorrow will be exactly the same. And the day after that, and the day after that. Modern people struggle with boredom when their phone dies or the internet goes out. Imagine that same feeling stretched across weeks with nothing to do but work, eat, sleep, and stare at water that all looks the same. The ocean has moods: calm, angry, playful. But after you've seen all the moods a few dozen times, even that variety stops being interesting. It's just water. Always water. Gray water under gray sky, stretching to a horizon that never gets closer. The psychological toll is real and significant. Historians don't write much about it because it doesn't leave archaeological evidence, and the sagas preferred heroic deeds to discussions of mental health. But common sense tells us these men must have struggled. How could they not? They're isolated from everything familiar. They're constantly cold, wet, and uncomfortable. They're eating terrible food. They're working their bodies to exhaustion. And they're doing all of this in an environment that offers zero mental stimulation beyond the work itself. Some men cope by becoming intensely focused on their tasks. They throw themselves into the work, into the maintenance, into perfecting their rowing stroke or their rope splicing. Work becomes meditation, a way to make hours pass without having to think too much about where you are or how long until you get somewhere else. Others retreat inward. They spend their breaks sitting quietly, not interacting, just lost in whatever thoughts sustain them. Memories of home, plans for when they return, fantasies about what they'll find at the destination, or nothing at all, just a kind of mental hibernation, consciousness reduced to its minimum, while the body goes through the required motions. A few find solace in stories. On good nights when the weather is calm enough and spirits are high enough, someone will tell a saga, one of the old stories about gods and heroes, battles, and monsters. These stories have been passed down orally for generations, memorized in their entirety by those with the gift for it. Hearing a familiar story recited well can transport you out of your present misery for an hour or two. It's the closest thing to entertainment available. Those who've experienced long deployments or extended tours in isolated places might recognize this psychological landscape. Whether you're on a ship in the North Atlantic, or at a forward base in Korea, or on a long-range patrol in the Pacific, the psychological challenges have commonalities. Boredom, isolation, the endless sameness of each day, the difficulty of maintaining morale and mental health when your environment offers nothing new, nothing interesting, nothing to break up the grinding routine. The worst times are at night, lying in your damp blanket trying to sleep while the ship moves beneath you. Your body is exhausted, but your mind won't shut off. You think about all the things that could go wrong. Storm, equipment failure, running out of food, missing your destination entirely, and sailing off into emptiness until you die of thirst. These aren't unreasonable fears. All of these things happened to Viking voyagers. Ships did disappear. Crews did starve. The ocean is littered with the bones of men who made small navigation errors or encountered weather they couldn't survive. So you lie there, trying not to think about those possibilities, trying to find some mental space where you can rest. Some men pray. The old gods, Odin, Thor, Njord the sea god, receive a lot of quiet, desperate prayers from men who might not be particularly pious on land, but become very religious indeed when their lives depend on forces beyond their control. Some men find comfort in fatalism. What will be, will be. If the Norns have woven your death into their tapestry, worrying won't change it. May as well rest. And yet, somehow, most men manage. Humans are remarkably adaptable creatures. What seems unbearable on day 3 becomes routine by day 10. The mind finds ways to cope, to create meaning and structure where none exists naturally. You develop rituals, always bailing with the same bucket, always sitting at the same oar position, always eating from the same bowl. These tiny consistencies create psychological anchors in an environment that offers few external reference points. You also develop dark humor, jokes about the food, about the weather, about the likelihood of ever seeing land again. Gallows humor, the kind that would seem inappropriate on land, but serves an important psychological function at sea. It's a way of acknowledging the difficulties without being overwhelmed by them. If you can laugh about potentially freeze to death, maybe you won't actually freeze to death. Or if you do, at least you weren't miserable right up to the end. The camaraderie helps too. 30 men trapped together on a small ship develop bonds, sometimes positive, sometimes contentious, but always intense. You know everyone's habits, everyone's strengths and weaknesses, everyone's stories. In a way, you know these men better than you know your own family, because you've seen them at their absolute worst and best. You've seen who steps up when conditions are terrible and who needs encouragement to keep going. That shared experience creates a kind of intimacy that's difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. If you've asked your father or grandfather about their service, particularly if they saw combat or spent extended time away from home, you might have heard about these bonds. The men you served with, the men who shared your hardships. They become your brothers in ways that are hard for civilians to understand. It's the same on a Viking longship. These men might not be blood family, but they're your crew. They'll pull their weight when you're too exhausted. You'll do the same for them. That mutual dependence creates trust that runs deeper than words. And then, without much warning, because weather forecasting in the Viking Age consists entirely of reading cloud formations and hoping you're right, conditions change. The swells that have been relatively manageable all day start to build. The spacing between waves shortens. The wind, which has been light and variable, picks a direction. Northwest, of course. Exactly where you need to go. And strengthens. The steersman sees it. The navigator sees it. Anyone who spent time at sea sees it. This is going to get bad. How bad? That remains to be determined. But definitely bad enough that plans need to change immediately. Reef the sail! The order goes out. This means reducing the sail's surface area to prevent too much wind force from overpowering the ship. Several men scramble to the rigging. They climb up, using the rough wool sail itself as a ladder in places, and work to gather the lower portion of the sail and tie it off with short ropes called reef points. It's dangerous work even in calm conditions. You're climbing 15 feet above a constantly moving deck, and in rising wind, it becomes genuinely hazardous. But it has to be done. An unreefed sail in a storm can tear, or worse, can tip the ship over if a strong gust hits at the wrong angle. The oars are shipped, pulled inboard, and secured along the length of the ship. Rowing in a storm is impossible anyway, and leaving the oars sticking out would invite them to be torn away by waves or wind. Everything loose gets lashed down. Sea chests, spare rope, the water barrels, anything that could shift or go overboard gets tied to something solid. You, having just finished a shift at the bailing bucket, immediately start bailing again, because in a storm, the amount of water coming into the ship will increase dramatically, and staying ahead of it becomes critical. But first you find a rope, a piece of spare rigging, anything strong, and you tie yourself to the mast. This is standard storm procedure. If a wave washes over the deck, which will definitely happen, you want to be secured to the ship. Going overboard in a storm is a death sentence. Nobody will be able to turn the ship around to look for you, and even if they could, finding a single person in those conditions would be impossible. Overboard means dead, so you tie yourself on. The first real wave hits. It's been building for 10 minutes, the swells getting progressively larger, but this one is different. It's a gray-green wall of water, perhaps 15 feet tall, and it hits the bow with enough force to make the entire ship shudder. Water explodes upward, and washes across the deck in a knee-deep rush. You hold onto your mast rope and brace, and the water hits you like a cold fist. It's shockingly powerful. For a moment, you can't breathe, can't see, can't do anything except hold on. Then it drains away through the gaps in the deck planking, and you gasp, air, and realize that was just the beginning. Now it begins in earnest. Wave after wave after wave. Some break over the bow, others hit from the side, threatening to roll the ship. The steering oar becomes difficult to control. The rudder wants to break free, and it takes all the steersman's strength, plus a helper, to keep it steady. The ship climbs up the face of each wave, tilts precariously at the crest, where for a heart-stopping moment, it feels like you might pitch pole straight over, then slides down the backside into the trough, where the next wave is already building. Everything is gray and white and dark green. Water and sky blend together. The horizon disappears. You lose all sense of direction except up and down, and even those become confused as the ship pitches and rolls. Your stomach is in revolt. Even experienced sailors can become seasick in conditions like this. It's not about tolerance. It's about the extreme motion simply overwhelming your body's ability to compensate. Bailing becomes a collective effort. The normal seepage has turned into a torrent. Water pours through the oar ports every time a wave washes over. Water comes from above as rain begins, not gentle rain, but cold, heavy drops that sting exposed skin. Multiple men work the bailing buckets, a coordinated brigade passing full buckets up and dumping them, passing empty buckets back. It's exhausting work made more difficult by the ship's violent motion. You miss with a throw, water spills back into the bilge. You slip on the wet deck, nearly lose your footing. But you keep going because if the bilge gets too full of water, the ship becomes unstable and might founder. Those veterans who experienced rough North Atlantic crossings during the war troop transports in winter, supply convoys fighting through storms, might remember something of this experience. Though even wartime transport ships were larger and more stable than a Viking longship. The psychology is similar though. The constant battering, the exhaustion, the cold that goes beyond discomfort into genuine hypothermia risk. And that fundamental question that keeps recurring, is this ship actually going to make it through this? Hours pass. You lose track of time completely. Day becomes evening, though you barely notice, because the storm darkness makes everything dim anyway. The wind howls, an actual physical sound like a living thing trying to tear the ship apart. The reefed sail strains and flogs despite being tied down. Somewhere you hear wood creaking under stress, and for a moment you wonder if a plank has sprung or a rib has cracked. But then another wave hits, and you're too busy holding on to worry about it. A man loses his grip and slides across the deck, slams into the rail hard enough that you hear it over the wind. Others grab him, haul him back to relative safety. He's bleeding from a gash on his forehead where he hit something, but he's conscious and can still work, so he goes back to bailing. There's no time for medical attention beyond a quick check that nothing's broken. The work continues. The worst moment comes perhaps 5 hours into the storm. A wave larger than any previous hits from a slightly different angle, and the ship rolls further than it has all day. For a terrifying stretched second, you're standing on what's almost a vertical surface, looking down at dark water that seems certain to swallow the ship. And you think, this is it. We're going over. But the ship rights itself, barely, reluctantly, but it comes back up. The designer who shaped these lines centuries of trial and error knew what he was doing. The ship wants to stay upright. It's built to survive this, assuming the crew does their part. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the waves start to decrease. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but that maximum intensity begins to ease. The swells are still massive, the wind still dangerous, but the worst has passed. The ship has survived. You've survived. The collective relief is palpable, but not spoken. Everyone's too exhausted. You just keep working, keep bailing, keep checking lashings, keep doing what needs to be done. But with the knowledge now that you'll probably live through this. By full dark though, again telling day from night in storm conditions is nearly impossible. The wind has dropped enough that the steersman feels comfortable loosening the sail, reefing slightly. To make some forward progress, you're off course, certainly. How far off course won't be known until the navigator can use his tools again, which won't be until the clouds break. But you're alive, you're still floating, and the ship responded well. That's a victory. Several men have injuries, bruises, cuts, one possible cracked rib from being slammed into something. These will be tended to shortly, when there's enough calm to actually assess damage properly. For now, everyone just keeps their station and tries to recover some energy. You're soaked through, not damp soaked. Every piece of clothing, every blanket, everything is waterlogged. The cold penetrates to your bones. This is how hypothermia kills, not dramatically, but gradually, as your body loses heat faster than it can generate it. You know this. Everyone knows this. So, despite being exhausted, you force yourself to move around. To keep blood flowing, you help with the bailing even though others could handle it. You don't let yourself just sit still and rest, because sitting still right now, in wet clothes in this cold, is how you die quietly in your sleep. The night passes slowly. Men sleep in shifts, never the full crew at once, because you can't afford to be caught unprepared if conditions worsen again. Those who aren't, sleeping bail. Check the ship, watch the horizon, and wonder when this voyage will end. It's been how many days now? 5? 7? Time blurs. Could be more. You'll know you're close to your destination when you see birds or smell land, or the navigator confirms your position. Until then, you just keep going. This is what Viking seafaring actually was. Not glorious, not particularly heroic, just hard, dangerous work performed by men who had no real alternatives and who developed the skills to survive through bitter experience and accumulated wisdom. The storm has passed, but it's left its mark in more ways than physical damage. The provisions master, one of the more senior crew members charged with managing and rationing food, is doing his daily inventory, and what he's finding isn't encouraging. A barrel that held dried fish has developed a crack during the storm, allowing seawater in. The fish inside isn't exactly spoiled, but it's soggier and saltier than dried fish should be, and salt-soaked dried fish is somehow even less appetizing than regular dried fish, which is saying something. The water situation is more concerning. Water is everything. You can survive on minimal food for quite a while. Men have done it, though they don't enjoy the experience. But water is non-negotiable. The human body doesn't care about your navigational challenges or your estimated time to landfall. It needs water on a fairly rigid schedule, and "I'll drink when we get there" isn't a viable strategy. He measures the remaining water by dipping a marked stick into each barrel. The marks tell him at a glance how much is left. He does some mental calculation, factoring in how many days since departure, how many men, what the daily ration has been. The numbers aren't terrible, but they're not comfortable either. If you make landfall in the next 3 to 4 days, you'll be fine. If it takes longer than that, rations will need to be cut. And if something goes seriously wrong, if you're blown further off course, if you miss your destination entirely, well, then it becomes a race between finding land and running out of water. Those who lived through rationing during the war years understand this arithmetic in a visceral way, not just knowing intellectually that resources are limited, but feeling it, planning around it, making hard choices about allocation. How much today? How much tomorrow? What do we keep in reserve for emergencies? The mathematics of survival aren't abstract. They're deeply personal when you're the one doing the calculating and your own life depends on getting it right. Today's ration is cut by perhaps 15%. Not dramatic. Nobody's starving. But it's noticeable. The piece of dried fish you're handed is definitely smaller than yesterday's. The hardtack, essentially a rock-hard biscuit made from flour, water, and salt, baked until it could survive nuclear war, is broken into a slightly smaller portion. And the water, measured out in your wooden cup, seems to disappear even faster than usual, despite your attempts to make it last. Hardtack deserves special mention because it might be the single most unpleasant food item ever created by humans with the explicit purpose of sustaining life. It's not meant to taste good. It's not meant to be easy to eat. It's meant to survive months or years without spoiling, provide basic calories, and not take up much space. Mission accomplished on all counts. The taste is somewhere between cardboard and dust. The texture is harder than most wood. Eating it requires soaking it in water if you have water to spare. You don't. Or simply gnawing on it like a particularly stubborn piece of jerky until small bits break off that you can actually swallow without choking. But you eat it anyway, because calories are calories, and your body doesn't care whether they come from gourmet cuisine or Stone Age survival rations. You chew slowly, working a corner of the hardtack until something breaks off, then swallow it with minimal water because you need to save most of your ration for actual drinking. Your jaw aches. Your teeth feel like they might break. This is breakfast. Enjoy. The smoked meat supplies are better preserved than the fish, but running lower. Smoking meat is an ancient preservation method. The smoke contains compounds that inhibit bacterial growth, and the surface drying helps prevent spoilage. But preserved doesn't mean fresh. This meat was prepared before the voyage started, which could be weeks ago. It's dry, tough, salty, and has that particular smoky flavor that ranges from interesting to overwhelming, depending on your tolerance. A small piece of smoked lamb or pork, no bigger than your thumb, accompanies your hardtack and fish. This is actually the highlight of the meal. The meat has more flavor than the other provisions and provides fat that the fish and hardtack lack. Fat calories are precious. Your body craves them. So you eat the meat slowly, savoring it in the way you might savor expensive cheese back on land, making it last as long as possible. Mealtime has none of the social character it might have had earlier in the voyage. Nobody jokes. Nobody tells stories. Everyone just eats their ration in relative silence, trying to make it feel like more than it is, trying to convince their stomachs that this is sufficient. Your stomach isn't convinced, but it'll have to learn to live with disappointment, because this is all there is until landfall. After eating, you're assigned to food preparation duty, which sounds more significant than it actually is. Preparation means checking the remaining fish for signs of rot. There's always some. You cut away the worst bits, examining the hardtack for weevils. There are definitely weevils. You pick them out or just eat them for the extra protein depending on how squeamish you're feeling, and ensuring everything is properly stored and secured. It's tedious work, and the constant exposure to food you're not allowed to eat is its own form of torture. But someone has to do it. Those of you who remember Victory Gardens making do with substitutes during rationing, or stretching food supplies when money was tight, might recognize this mindset. Nothing is wasted. Even the dubious bits of fish get eaten by someone. The hardtack is consumed down to the last crumb. Every drop of water is accounted for. Waste isn't just wrong, it's potentially fatal. And when you internalize that equation, your relationship with food changes. It stops being about pleasure or nutrition in the abstract. It becomes fuel, pure and simple, and you're grateful for any fuel you get. The psychological weight of dwindling supplies affects the crew in subtle ways. Conversations become shorter. Humor becomes darker. More jokes about starving or dying of thirst, as if making light of it reduces the actual threat. Men become more protective of their personal rations. Not hoarding exactly, but more careful. You don't share as freely as you might have at the voyage's start when supplies seemed abundant. It's not selfishness, it's self-preservation. And underlying everything is the question that nobody quite asks aloud. What if we don't make it? What if the navigator's calculations are wrong? What if we've been blown so far off course that landfall is weeks away instead of days? These questions have no good answers, so they remain unspoken. But they're there in the back of everyone's mind, adding psychological hunger to the physical kind. On the morning of what you think might be the 8th or 9th day, you've honestly lost count, something changes. Not the ocean, which still stretches endlessly in all directions. Not the sky, which remains mostly gray, though perhaps fractionally lighter than yesterday. What changes is that you're no longer alone. A seabird appears. At first you think you're imagining it, that exhaustion and hunger have started producing hallucinations. But no, there it is, a white shape with black-tipped wings, wheeling above the ship, calling with that distinctive harsh cry that means gull or gannet or some similar species. A species that, critically, doesn't venture more than about 50 miles from land. 50 miles. That's perhaps 2 days of mixed rowing and sailing if conditions are favorable. That's achievable. That's hope in white feathers. The navigator sees it too, obviously. He tracks the bird's direction carefully. Birds fly out to feed during the day and return to land at evening. So the direction the bird came from tells you something about where land isn't, since it flew away from there to find food, and where it goes at dusk will tell you where land is. Simple, elegant, and remarkably effective if you know what you're looking for. More birds appear throughout the morning. 2 gannets, a fulmar, several gulls. They follow the ship, clearly hoping you might clean fish or toss scraps overboard. You don't have scraps to toss, but they don't know that. Their calls break the monotony of wind and wave sounds you've been hearing for days. It's almost musical, in a harsh seabird kind of way. The mood on ship shifts perceptibly. Nobody says much. Vikings aren't prone to premature celebration, but you can see it in postures and movements. Men sit up a bit straighter. The rowing has more energy behind it. The constant low-grade depression of endless ocean voyaging lifts slightly. Birds mean land. Land means this ordeal has a finite end. That knowledge provides fuel more effective than any amount of dried fish. The steersman consults with the navigator. They study the birds, noting their species, their behavior, their flight directions. The consensus? Land is northwest, probably Iceland based on the navigator's reckoning of latitude and days traveled. Could be Greenland if they've badly misjudged, but probably Iceland. 2 days at most if the wind cooperates. 2 days. You can survive 2 more days. The water rations that seemed alarming yesterday suddenly seem adequate. The food supplies that had everyone worried will last. 2 days is manageable. 2 days is a blink of an eye compared to what you've already endured. Those who've experienced long deployments know this feeling. That moment when you get word that you're rotating home soon, that the end is in sight. Time doesn't actually move faster, but it feels different. The same hardships that seemed unbearable when they stretched into an uncertain future become tolerable when you know they're temporary. The human mind is strange that way. It can endure almost anything if there's a finish line visible, but struggles with indefinite duration even in easier conditions. The afternoon brings more encouraging signs. The watercolor changes subtly, still dark, still deep, but with a slightly different quality that experienced sailors recognize as coastal rather than open ocean. The change is subtle enough that if you weren't specifically looking for it, you might miss it entirely. But the navigator notices. He's seen this transition hundreds of times. Floating debris appears. Not much, but enough to be meaningful. A log, salt-weathered but clearly from land, bobs past. Some seaweed, kelp by the look of it, which grows in coastal shallows. A piece of driftwood with barnacles attached. Each piece of evidence adds to the growing certainty you're approaching land. As evening approaches, you watch the birds carefully. Where will they go? The answer becomes clear as the light fades. Northwest, in a steady stream. They're heading home to roost. And home is exactly where you want to go. The ship adjusts course to follow them. The oars come out again despite general exhaustion, because now there's a reason to push hard. Nobody needs to be ordered to row faster. Everyone does it automatically. The rhythm picks up. The ship surges forward, eating up miles with renewed purpose. You don't see land yet. The sun, finally visible for brief moments through breaking clouds, sets over a horizon that still appears empty of anything but water. But you'll see it tomorrow, almost certainly tomorrow. The birds guarantee it, and that knowledge lets you sleep that night despite cold and damp and general misery. Tomorrow, land. Tomorrow, the voyages end. Dawn breaks with actual visibility. The clouds have largely cleared during the night, leaving a cold, clear morning that lets you see for miles. And there, unmistakable on the northwestern horizon, is a dark line that isn't ocean, isn't cloud, isn't your imagination. Land. Iceland. Specifically, though you won't know which part of Iceland until you get closer. The volcanic island rises from the North Atlantic like a jagged wound in the Earth's surface. Black rock, gray cliffs, mountains that still hold snow even in summer. It's not pretty exactly. Not in the gentle, welcoming way that Norwegian fjords are pretty, but it's magnificent in a harsh, primal way. And right now, after over a week at sea, it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. The reactions are subdued, but genuine. Nobody cheers. Nobody celebrates openly. That's not the Viking way. And besides, you're not landed yet. Rocky coastlines are dangerous. Getting this close and then wrecking on the rocks would be almost worse than never making it at all. But you can see the relief in everyone's posture. Shoulders that have been hunched for days relax slightly. Faces that have been set in grim determination soften. It's going to be okay. You're going to make it. The navigator and steersman are now intensely focused. This is where local knowledge becomes critical. Iceland's coast is notoriously treacherous. Volcanic rock creates underwater hazards, sudden shallows, and currents that can push you onto rocks before you realize the danger. But the navigator has been here before. He recognizes landmarks, a distinctive cliff formation, a particular mountain profile. He knows where the good landing beaches are, where the settlements are, where you can bring a ship in safely. The course is adjusted, heading now toward a specific bay the navigator recognizes. The sail is unfurled completely. The wind is favorable, coming from behind, and you want to use it to maximum advantage. The ship picks up speed, actually seeming eager to reach land after so long at sea. Details become clearer as you close the distance. You can see individual boulders on the shore now. Trees? Not many. Iceland has never had extensive forests, but the occasional twisted birch clinging to a sheltered valley, smoke rising from what must be a longhouse. That means people. That means a settlement. That means you found exactly what you were looking for. The water changes character completely. The deep ocean swells give way to shorter, choppier waves. As the water shoals, the color shifts from deep blue-gray to a lighter shade that lets you actually see the bottom in places. volcanic sand and rocks, alien-looking but beautiful in their strangeness. The temperature even changes slightly as you enter the fjord, the air losing some of its bitter ocean edge and picking up land smells, earth, vegetation, smoke, animal dung. It smells wonderful. You can see people on shore now. They've spotted your ship. A long ship under sail heading into the bay is visible from miles away, and several figures have gathered on the beach to watch your approach. Some are probably wondering whether you're traders or raiders. The answer, at least this time, is traders, but they won't know for certain until you're closer and can communicate. Vikings have earned their reputation for unpredictability. The final approach is careful and methodical. The sail is lowered partway to reduce speed. Oars come out for precise maneuvering. The steersman calls directions, and the rowers respond with practiced coordination, turning the ship, slowing it, positioning it exactly where it needs to be. This is expert seamanship on display, taking a 60-foot vessel, moving at speed and bringing it to a controlled stop in shallow water without damaging anything. The keel touches bottom gently, just a slight scraping sound and a barely perceptible shudder through the hull. You're in shallow water now, maybe 3 feet deep, close enough to shore that men can jump over and help pull the ship the final distance. Several crew members vault over the side, landing with splashes in the cold Icelandic water. Cold, but they're already soaked and freezing, so what's a bit more water? And grab the sides to help drag the vessel onto the beach. And then, after more than a week at sea, after storms and hardship and constant work and dwindling rations and moments of genuine fear that you might not make it, your feet touch solid ground. Not the constantly moving deck of a ship, not the slight give of sand underwater, but actual, reliable, stable ground that doesn't move when you stand on it. Your legs don't quite work right. After days of accommodating to the ship's motion, solid ground feels wrong. You sway slightly, and it's not the ground moving. It's your inner ear still expecting motion that isn't there. It takes a moment to adjust, to remember how to walk on something that doesn't pitch and roll. Around you, other crew members are having the same experience, stumbling slightly, grinning at their own awkwardness. People from the settlement approach. Cautious at first, you're strangers after all, and armed strangers at that, but relaxing as they recognize your ship's home port markings and realize you're not raiders. Greetings are exchanged. News is requested and given. The settlement elder appears, a man perhaps 60 winters old, who's been managing this outpost for longer than you've been alive. He welcomes you, offers hospitality, asks about your voyage and your cargo. But the details of trade negotiations and news exchange can wait. Right now, the only thing that matters is that you made it. You crossed one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth in a wooden boat that modern people would consider a death trap. You survived on provisions that would make modern survival food look luxurious. You navigated without instruments using methods that seem almost supernatural. And you did it because this is what you do. This is what Vikings do. This is what your fathers did, and their fathers before them. Those who remember their fathers and grandfathers returning from sea voyages, whether fishing expeditions or naval deployments or merchant marine runs, might recognize the expression on these men's faces. Relief, certainly. Exhaustion, obviously. But also pride. The quiet pride of having done something genuinely difficult, of having survived through skill and endurance and teamwork. No fanfare, no medals, no recognition beyond the simple fact of having made it. That's enough. So, what was it all for? Why did they do this? Why did thousands of Vikings, over hundreds of years, choose to climb into wooden boats and sail off into one of the most hostile maritime environments on Earth, knowing full well that many of them wouldn't come back? The easy answer is practical. Trade. These voyages carried goods, furs, walrus ivory, dried fish, timber, to markets where they could be sold at profit. They established settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and briefly even North America, expanding Norse territory and creating new opportunities. They opened trade routes that connected Scandinavia to the British Isles, to the Baltic, to the Mediterranean, through intermediaries. In purely economic terms, these voyages made sense. But there's more to it than economics. There's something in the human spirit, or at least in the Norse version of the human spirit, that looks at impossible challenges and says, yes, I'll try that. Not because it's wise, not because it's safe, but because it's possible, and because not trying would be worse than the risk of failure. Modern people struggle to understand this mindset because we've largely eliminated physical danger from our daily lives. We have forecasts and insurance and rescue services. We have GPS and satellite phones and coast guards. The ocean is still dangerous, obviously, but we've wrapped ourselves in so many layers of safety equipment and procedures that the fundamental terror of being alone on open water with nothing but your skills and luck is difficult to access. Vikings had none of that. They had the ship, their skills, and each other. That's it. And somehow, that was enough. Those of you who served in wars before modern technology, before helicopters could evacuate wounded in minutes, before real-time communication with command, before night vision and GPS and all the equipment that makes modern warfare survivable, might understand something of this. There's a certain clarity that comes from knowing that you're genuinely on your own, that your survival depends entirely on your competence and your comrades. It's terrifying, but it's also, in a strange way, freeing. You don't waste energy worrying about things you can't control. You focus on what you can do, and you do it to the best of your ability, and you accept the results. The Vikings' mastery of ocean navigation stands as one of the great achievements of medieval technology. They didn't have superior materials. Their ships were wood and rope and wool, same as anyone else had. They didn't have superior information. Their maps were crude or non-existent. Their navigation tools were primitive by later standards. What they had was superior knowledge, built up over generations, tested through bitter experience, and passed down from father to son through a culture that valued seafaring skill above almost everything else. That knowledge was practical, not theoretical. They didn't understand the physics of why calcite could find the sun through clouds. They didn't have equations for optimal hull design. They didn't need to. They knew what worked because they'd tried it, failed, learned from the failure, and tried again. Thousands of voyages, thousands of navigators, thousands of ships gradually perfecting techniques through a process that would take centuries. but would ultimately produce vessels and methods capable of crossing oceans. The cost of this knowledge was measured in lost ships and drowned men. The sagas record the famous navigators, the successful voyages, the dramatic discoveries. They don't dwell on the failures, the ships that simply disappeared, the men who never came home. But those failures were part of the learning process. Every lost ship taught a lesson about what not to do. Every successful voyage proved a technique or confirmed a piece of knowledge. This settlement in Iceland represents both an ending and a beginning. It's the end of this particular voyage, but it's also just one link in a chain of Norse expansion that would eventually reach North America. The descendants of these men would push further, establishing Greenland's Norse colonies, and a few would reach Newfoundland, becoming the first Europeans to set foot in the Americas, centuries before Columbus. But more immediately, this settlement represents survival. These men came here because Norway or Denmark or wherever they originated couldn't support everyone. Population pressure, political conflicts, limited farmland. The reasons varied, but the result was the same. Some people had to leave, and when they left, they needed somewhere to go. Iceland offered that somewhere. Harsh, volcanic, cold, but also empty. Mostly, there were a few Irish monks who got there first, but they didn't put up much resistance. Free land, new opportunities, the chance to build something of your own without answering to a lord or king. So they came. In ships like this one, across water like you just crossed, bringing families and livestock and tools and everything needed to establish permanent settlement in one of the most inhospitable environments humans have ever chosen to colonize. Those watching this, who grew up in America's post-Willie I boom, who benefited from programs like the GI Bill that made home ownership and education accessible, might see parallels to the Norse expansion. Both involved people seeking opportunity, using whatever means available. Ships then, government programs more recently, to establish themselves somewhere new. Both involved hardship and risk. Both changed the world. Norse expansion permanently altered the demographic and political map of the North Atlantic, while American post-war expansion created the modern middle class and reshaped global economics. The scale is different, the technology is different, but the human drive to find somewhere better, to build something for yourself and your family, to accept risk in pursuit of opportunity, that's remarkably constant across centuries. And all of it depended on men willing to climb into wooden boats and face the ocean. So here we are at the end of tonight's journey. We've experienced a Viking ocean voyage from waking on open water to making landfall in Iceland. We felt the cold, tasted the miserable food, pulled the oars until our backs screamed, and weathered a storm that tried its best to kill us. We've navigated by methods that seem almost magical, survived on provisions that make modern MREs look gourmet, and somehow made it across one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth in a wooden boat that most modern people wouldn't trust to cross a lake. What's remarkable isn't that Vikings did this occasionally as extraordinary adventures. What's remarkable is that they did it routinely as standard procedure, to the point where crossing the North Atlantic became almost mundane. Almost. The individual names are mostly lost to history. The sagas record a few famous navigators: Eric the Red, Leif Erikson, Bjarni Herjolfsson, who may have reached North America accidentally while lost. But for every name that survived in story, there were hundreds who made the same voyages, faced the same dangers, and succeeded or failed in anonymity. These men weren't superheroes. They were just men, strong, skilled, knowledgeable, but also human, with all the limitations that implies. They got cold, they got scared, they got seasick and exhausted and hungry. They complained about the food and the weather and the endless work, but they kept going. They did their jobs, they pulled their weight, and collectively, through thousands of individual voyages, they accomplished something genuinely extraordinary. They proved that humans could master the ocean, not conquer it. Nobody conquers the ocean, but understand it well enough to cross it reliably and return to tell the tale. That knowledge would eventually spread. The techniques Vikings pioneered would influence later European seafaring. The confidence that ocean crossings were possible would inspire later explorers. The settlements they established would become permanent features of the Atlantic world. But that's looking forward. For these 30 men sitting on a beach in Iceland, exhausted and relieved and glad to be alive, the significance is simpler and more personal. They left home, they crossed the sea, they arrived, mission accomplished. Now there will be food, real food, fresh food, hot food cooked on a proper hearth instead of a sandbox. There will be shelter, actual walls, and a roof that doesn't move. There will be rest, sleeping on something that doesn't rock, doesn't throw you around, doesn't require you to tie yourself to the mast. And eventually, after the cargo is traded and new cargo loaded, after the ship is repaired and provisioned, after they've rested and recovered, they'll do it all again. They'll climb back aboard this wooden vessel, point the dragon prow toward open ocean, and sail back to wherever they came from. Because this is their job. This is their life. This is what Vikings do. Those of you who've spent your lives doing hard work, whether you served in the military, worked construction, fished commercially, farmed, or any of the 1,000 other jobs that require physical endurance and mental toughness, you understand something that modern culture sometimes forgets. Most of the actual work that keeps civilization functioning isn't glamorous. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't win awards. It's just hard, necessary labor performed by competent people who show up and do their jobs. Viking seafarers were those people. The long-ship crews were skilled tradesmen of a particular specialty. Their workplace happened to be one of the most dangerous on Earth, but that doesn't change the fundamental nature of what they did. They were professionals doing professional work to professional standards. The romance that later cultures attached to Vikings, the raids, the battles, the dramatic sagas, that came later or happened around the edges of the real work. The real work was this: crossing oceans, moving cargo, establishing settlements, and doing it reliably enough that an entire civilization could be built on that foundation. If tonight's journey stirred memories, whether your own from sea service or stories passed down from fathers and grandfathers who knew the ocean in a different era, or just appreciation for the kind of hard work that builds things that last, I'd be honored if you shared them in the comments below. Your generation's perspective on endurance and competence and doing what needs to be done, regardless of comfort, is irreplaceable. These aren't just history lessons. They're reminders of capabilities we still possess, of strength we can still draw on when needed. Now rest well, friends. The voyage is over for tonight. The ship is safely beached. The crew has survived. And in the morning, with solid ground beneath your feet and the ocean safely at a distance, the world will feel different. It always does after you've crossed something dangerous and made it to the other side. I'll see you in the next one. Fair winds and calm seas.